This morning, the Princess of Wales back on the global stage. Kate's first international trip since her cancer recovery, stepping out on her own, a research trip of sorts, learning about a cause she cares deeply about.
Thousands of people have packed the square. People are hanging out the windows, and you can see her right here meeting some of her littlest fans.
7 minutes ago, a sentence spoken inside a guarded palace room shattered months of fear. Princess Catherine's doctor confirmed that her treatment had produced what the medical team described as a miraculous recovery. William did not celebrate immediately. He lowered his head, gripped the edge of the table, and asked the physician to repeat the words. For a family prepared for uncertainty, the impossible had suddenly become real, but the announcement carried consequences no one had yet considered. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Catherine watched the doctor slide the medical summary across the table. The document carried independent examinations, each ordered to ensure hope had not outrun certainty. The Princess of Wales, the wife of the future king, and a woman expected to stand beside the crown, had spent months away from public duty, leaving her children unsettled, and the palace aware of how much depended on her strength. One premature promise could have devastated the family twice. William kept his eyes on the report, yet the prince could not touch it. The physician explained that the latest tests showed no immediate evidence of the threat that had kept Catherine under medical supervision. He delivered the confirmation through a documented private consultation, with the findings placed before them. Still, she did not smile. She asked one question in a voice almost too quiet to hear. Could she finally tell George, Charlotte, and Louis that the worst was over? The doctor answered carefully. Her recovery was extraordinary, but healing would still demand patience, controlled commitments, and protection from exhaustion. Catherine nodded, because she understood the cost of false certainty. She had known for several days that the results looked promising, yet refused to tell Charles or the children until the senior physician gave an unequivocal conclusion. The king carried private worry, and she would not offer relief that might later collapse. William picked up the summary, read the decisive line again, and set it down with trembling hands. He had spent months preparing for every possibility except this one. Catherine reached across the table, but he stood before she could speak, and walked into the corridor. The closed door gave him the privacy the consultation room had denied. When she followed and placed her hand inside his composure broke. Relief had arrived, but peace had not. For George, Charlotte, Louis, Charles, and William, Catherine's return would reopen fears they had never voiced. The doctor's words ended one battle, yet as the news moved through the royal family, it exposed the private wounds each person had hidden during her absence. Recovery did not erase what the illness had already taken. Behind closed doors, William had carried the responsibilities of fatherhood, public duty, and private fear, while refusing to reveal which burden hurt most. George had become quieter. Charlotte had watched every whispered conversation. Louis had continued asking questions no adult could answer safely. Now Catherine was returning to them. But the family she was coming home to had been changed by the possibility that she might not. William had learned to divide each day into pieces. The prince attended royal engagements, rushed back for school routines, took medical calls in private, and sat awake after the children had gone to sleep. Royal engagements were official duties, carried out on behalf of the crown, but to him, they had become hours spent pretending everything was normal. Every public smile hid one terrifying thought. He might one day have to raise George, Charlotte, and Louis without the woman who held their home together. Catherine entered the sitting room slowly and found all three children waiting. She had rehearsed the words, yet her voice still shook when she told them the doctor believed her recovery had gone beyond every expectation. George stared at the floor, fighting tears because the young heir had spent months trying to look older than he felt. Then he crossed the room, wrapped his arms around her, and admitted that he had been too frightened to ask whether she would ever return to public life. Charlotte did not move at first. Relief softened her face, but anger quickly followed. The princess had heard fragments through closed doors, noticed sudden changes in schedules, and watched adults lower their voices whenever she entered. She told Catherine that silence had not protected her. It had forced her to imagine something worse. Her mother pulled her close and apologized, while Louis asked the simplest question of all: would she still need to disappear for days at a time? William answered before fear could take hold again. He promised the youngest child that no return to royal duty would happen at the cost of their family. Later, when the children had left, he warned Catherine that the public would demand more the moment the recovery became known. She listened, and the future king made his position clear. Celebration could not become another form of pressure. Charles received the news through a documented call from the doctor and remained silent for several seconds. The king felt the relief of a father-in-law, but also understood what her recovery meant for the monarchy's future. Catherine was not merely returning to her family. She was restoring stability to a royal house, already carrying uncertainty. Yet the deepest fear had begun long before the diagnosis. Months earlier, moments before a private family gathering, Catherine had reached for a chair, lost her balance, and collapsed. To understand why the doctor's confirmation felt like a miracle, the family had to return to the moment when hope first gave way to terror. The crisis had not begun with a formal announcement or a carefully worded palace statement. It began during a private rehearsal for a royal charity reception, when Catherine stopped in the middle of a conversation, reached for the back of a chair, and suddenly lost her balance. William crossed the room before anyone else understood what was happening. The music stopped, the doors were locked, and within minutes, the future of the monarchy had become secondary to saving one woman. Catherine had been holding prepared remarks for a major Windsor charity reception when the pages slipped from her hand. The event was meant to support organizations working with vulnerable families, but that purpose vanished the instant she collapsed beside the table. William dropped to his knees and called her name, while an aide summoned the medical team. Anne reached the doorway first and ordered everyone unnecessary out of the room. The Princess Royal, the monarch's sister and one of the family's most senior working members, kept her voice steady even as her hands began to shake. William pressed one hand against Catherine's shoulder and begged her to stay still. When she opened her eyes, she did not ask what had happened. She asked whether George, Charlotte, or Louis had seen her fall. The question cut deeper than the silence around them because it revealed where her fear truly lived. She was not thinking about the reception, the palace, or the crown. She was thinking about 3 children who had already sensed that something was wrong. Anne remained beside them until the doctors arrived. She controlled the room, redirected frightened staff, and prevented panic from escaping into the corridors. Yet the moment Catherine was taken away, the Princess Royal gripped the back of the same chair and lowered her head. William saw it. For the first time, he understood that even the strongest member of the family believed the danger might be real. The first medical briefing changed everything. Through a documented consultation, doctors used language serious enough for William to cancel several engagements before the palace acknowledged any health concern. Catherine had postponed earlier examinations because she blamed her exhaustion on public pressure, motherhood, and a punishing schedule. That decision now carried a terrible weight. Catherine also kept the darkest possibilities from Charles. She feared the king was already carrying his own health concerns and constitutional responsibilities, the formal duties required of the sovereign to keep the state functioning. She believed silence would protect him. Instead, it isolated everyone. From that night onward, every schedule, family meal, and public appearance bent around her treatment. The collapse became the point of no return. Later, William would discover that she had hidden earlier symptoms from him as well. The recovery announcement brought relief, but before he could accept it fully, they had to confront the secrecy that nearly left him unprepared for losing her. The argument happened without aides, advisors, or prepared statements. William stood across from Catherine in a private Windsor room, the recovery report still folded in his hand. He was grateful she was alive, yet furious that she had faced the earliest warning signs alone. Catherine did not retreat. She told him she had been trying to protect him from another crisis. His answer came quietly, but it carried months of buried fear. "You protected me by shutting me out." William placed the report on the table and asked how long she had known. The prince had spent months controlling his anger because treatment had left no room for blame, only survival. Now relief had opened the door to everything he had buried. He had been carrying royal pressure, Charles's reduced schedule, and the children's fear. Yet none of those burdens hurt as deeply as learning that his wife had suffered in silence beside him. Catherine held his gaze and admitted the truth. Weeks before the collapse, she had noticed exhaustion that sleep did not fix, pain she could not explain, and moments when her strength disappeared without warning. The Princess of Wales, the wife of the heir and the woman expected to become queen, had convinced herself the symptoms would fade when the royal calendar became quieter. That calendar was the official program of duties, visits, and ceremonies arranged around senior family members. But it never became quiet. William asked why she had trusted hope more than him. She answered that fear had distorted every decision. Charles was already reducing engagements. The children needed stability, and the future king was being pulled between public duty and private responsibility. Catherine believed one more crisis would break him. He told her the secrecy had done something worse. It had made him question whether they had truly faced the illness together. Catherine crossed the room and stopped beside a cabinet. Her voice changed when she revealed, through a private recorded account made during treatment, that she had written letters to George, Charlotte, and Louis before one crucial medical stage. She had not surrendered hope. She simply could not bear the thought of leaving without telling each child what she loved about them, what she feared for them, and what she hoped they would remember. William turned away before asking where the letters were. Catherine told him they remained sealed inside a locked drawer. The anger left his face at once. Grief replaced it. He stood in silence until she touched his shoulder, then pulled her into his arms as if the recovery could still be taken from them. The fracture between them closed, but control did not return. Their reconciliation could heal the marriage, not settle the timetable ahead. Beyond that room, doctors, palace officials, and Charles were preparing to decide when Catherine would resume duty, and some of them could overrule even William. A miraculous recovery did not automatically restore Catherine's freedom. Within hours, physicians, private secretaries, security officials, and senior royals gathered to decide how much the public should be told, and how quickly she should reappear. William wanted caution. Palace planners saw opportunity. Charles understood both sides. At the center sat Catherine, listening as others debated her future until she moved the briefing papers aside and reminded them that the life under discussion belonged to her. Catherine sat beside Charles as a senior aide, proposed a major public appearance within days. The Sovereign's Office, the team that manages the monarch's official schedule and public statements, wanted a moment powerful enough to reassure the country. Her doctor controlled the medical recommendation, but palace officials controlled the machinery surrounding any return. That divide mattered because one side measured healing, while the other measured confidence, stability, and the monarchy's need to appear steady. William stopped the discussion before the aide reached the final page. The prince rejected any timetable that turned his wife's recovery into a public relations opportunity. He had watched her lose strength, conceal pain, and struggle through treatment. Now he feared that celebration would become pressure, and pressure would become another kind of danger. The doctor supported him, warning through a documented medical briefing that exhaustion and emotional stress could still reverse the progress everyone was praising. Charles removed his glasses and studied Catherine's face. The king understood why advisors wanted certainty. Her absence had left charities waiting, ceremonies weakened, and the future of the royal household exposed at a time when his own reduced schedule had already created concern. Yet he also saw how still she had become, while others spoke for her. He placed the papers down and asked the only question that mattered. What did she want? Catherine answered without hesitation. She would return in stages. The Princess of Wales would begin with private charitable meetings, where she could listen without facing the strain of a large crowd. Only later would she consider a ceremonial engagement, an official public event connected to royal duty, national tradition, or the crown. She would not allow the word miracle to erase the reality that recovery still required limits. William looked at her and said nothing, but the relief in his expression was unmistakable. Charles nodded and backed the decision, forcing the room to accept that her body was not a palace asset to be scheduled. The senior aide gathered the rejected timetable, closed the folder, and left knowing that weeks of planning had just collapsed. Catherine had reclaimed authority over her return, but the victory carried a cost. Palace expectations shifted, public promises vanished, and strained relationships tightened further. The battle inside that room was over. The fallout was only beginning. The palace expected celebration, and instead, the recovery announcement created a new kind of danger. Messages of joy flooded royal offices. Crowds began anticipating Catherine's return, and broadcasters prepared for her first appearance before one had even been approved. Every expression of love carried an expectation. Every expectation became a demand. When Catherine saw a proposed schedule filled with ceremonies, meetings, and travel, she closed the folder and realized that surviving illness might be easier than surviving the rush to reclaim her. Catherine received the revised calendar before breakfast. The Princess of Wales studied page after page of postponed charity visits, ceremonial duties, and public meetings now being reconsidered because her health had improved. A ceremonial duty was an official appearance tied to the crown, national tradition, or public service. Each entry looked harmless alone. Together, they formed a return so intense that the life she had fought to protect was already being claimed by others. Catherine picked up a pen and began crossing out engagements. One vanished, then another, then nearly all of them, until only 2 private charitable meetings remained. She told William that the word recovered had made people forget she was still rebuilding her strength. The prince supported every deletion, yet he also understood the danger outside the room. If she refused major events, rumors about her condition could return, and public trust might again become trapped between concern and suspicion. Charlotte heard 2 members of staff discussing possible dates for her mother's first appearance. The young princess entered the room before they could lower their voices, and asked Catherine whether royal duty was about to take her away again. Her anger carried fear beneath it. She had endured months of whispered updates and changing routines, and now the celebration sounded like the beginning of another absence. Catherine pulled her close, and promised that no schedule would be decided without considering the children first. Tension hardened later that day when a senior aide argued that the monarchy needed Catherine's visibility. Anne answered before William could speak. The Princess Royal said the institution could not be protected by exhausting the person it depended upon. She reminded the room that duty without judgment became cruelty, and that the crown would gain nothing from forcing a premature return. William watched Catherine absorb every word. He knew doctors could recommend limits, courtiers could shape appearances, and headlines could demand certainty. But none of them could decide what their family should become after fear had changed it. Catherine finally closed the diary and looked at him. The answer, she said, would not come from a briefing room. With the palace pulling in one direction and the family pulling in another, they withdrew from everyone to decide what recovery would truly mean. There were no officials in the room when the future king and queen made the decision that would shape their family. William switched off his phone. Catherine placed the proposed schedules aside. For the first time since the diagnosis, they spoke not about treatment, succession, or public duty, but about the years they still hoped to share. Recovery, they agreed, could not mean returning to the life that had helped convince her to ignore her own exhaustion. William sat opposite her at Adelaide Cottage, the family home that had become their refuge from palace pressure. The cottage mattered because it was one of the few places where they could speak as husband and wife before speaking as royal figures. No doctors waited outside. No aides held briefing papers. No private secretary, a senior official who manages royal duties and communications, could interrupt the silence between them. Catherine removed her engagement ring and turned it slowly between her fingers. She asked whether William would still support her if she permanently reduced her workload, knowing the decision could bring criticism and claims that she was failing the crown. The Princess of Wales had spent years believing strength meant appearing whenever duty called. Now she understood that the same rhythm of travel, ceremonies, and emotional restraint had taught her to ignore the warnings her body had been giving. William answered without hesitation. The prince told her that survival mattered more than any calendar, ceremony, or headline. He had already imagined a future without her, and no public complaint could frighten him as deeply as that memory. Catherine looked down at the ring, then placed it back on her hand. The gesture was small, but the promise behind it was not. They agreed that no family health decision would ever again be hidden. William would not bury fear beneath duty, and Catherine would not conceal pain to protect him. Neither would accept engagements that repeatedly separated them from the children during periods of vulnerability. Their old life had demanded silence. Their new one would demand honesty. Catherine chose one symbolic public appearance instead of a full return. She would thank the nation, acknowledge the support that had carried the family through the crisis, and make clear that recovery did not mean surrendering every limit. William agreed to stand beside her, but he refused to speak for her. The story belonged to Catherine, not to palace planners. The decision left Adelaide Cottage in a private conversation, but it did not remain private for long. News of the carefully chosen appearance reached broadcasters. Crowds began moving toward Buckingham Palace and Windsor, and the family's personal miracle became a national event. By sunrise, the recovery was no longer a palace secret. One newspaper filled its front page with 3 words: "Catherine is clear," printed above a photograph of the princess smiling beside William. At Windsor, strangers gathered behind the barriers carrying flowers, handwritten prayers, and photographs of their own loved ones who had faced illness. When Catherine finally appeared, the crowd did not erupt immediately. For one suspended second, thousands simply stared, as though afraid the miracle might disappear if they moved. Broadcasters interrupted regular programming and treated the doctor's confirmation as one of the most emotional royal developments in years. The palace statement, a formal message released on behalf of the royal household, confirmed that Catherine would resume only selected duties. That detail mattered because it drew a clear line between recovery and full strength. It also reassured families facing serious illness that hope could exist without pretending fear had vanished. Catherine stepped forward beside William as white flowers and handwritten cards filled the space beyond the barriers at Windsor Castle. The prince remained close, but he did not guide her words or answer for her. This was her return, and he had promised that the palace would not turn it into something else. Then she noticed a child holding a sign that read, "My mum is fighting too." Catherine stopped. The princess left the planned route and approached the boy and his father, causing security officers to tense before William quietly signaled that she should be allowed through. She listened as the man described months of treatment, uncertainty, and exhausted hope. Her reply was recorded by nearby broadcasters. Hope, she told him, had to be protected even when certainty was impossible. The child held her hand, and the crowd finally broke into applause. Charles watched the broadcast privately and set down his tea untouched. The king had feared for Catherine as family, but he also understood her place in the monarchy's future. She could reach people through vulnerability in a way ceremony never could. When the camera showed William standing behind her, the monarch's relief turned into visible pride. The palace repeated that no full schedule had been approved. Catherine would choose limited engagements, protect her health, and refuse the old demand for instant normality. Her appearance became a declaration of survival, not a surrender to expectation. The crowd celebrated her return, but the deepest change had already happened. The family would no longer sacrifice health to preserve the appearance of royal invincibility. The true meaning of the recovery would now be measured at home, and in the kind of monarchy they chose to build afterward. Catherine's recovery did more than return a princess to her family. It ended the illusion that royal duty must always come before human vulnerability. The doctor's confirmation gave William back his wife, the children back their mother, and Charles back the woman he trusted to help carry the monarchy forward. Yet the final victory was not found in ceremonies or cheering crowds. It came when Catherine closed the palace diary, walked toward her family, and chose life before obligation. Catherine's doctors remained confident, but no one inside the household mistook progress for invincibility. The Princess of Wales would continue rebuilding her strength under a controlled schedule, meaning only carefully selected duties, approved around her health and family needs. That decision mattered because one reckless return could undo months of healing. It also mattered because George, Charlotte, and Louis had already learned how quickly royal obligation could steal calm from their home. William changed with her. The prince no longer believed endurance meant remaining silent while fear consumed him. He had once treated suffering as something to hide behind duty, but the crisis taught him a harder truth. Courage sometimes meant disappointing the institution to protect the people he loved. The future king would still serve the crown, yet he would never again allow its demands to silence a warning inside his family. Catherine placed her phone away before joining the children for an ordinary evening meal. George relaxed slowly, as though he was finally allowing himself to believe the danger had passed. Charlotte reached beneath the table and held her mother's hand without speaking. Louis looked up and asked the question that carried every fear he had been unable to explain. Would she still be home when he woke the next morning? Catherine answered at once. She would be there. The certainty in her voice gave the children something no palace statement could provide. George smiled. Charlotte tightened her grip. Louis returned to his meal, satisfied by a promise that sounded simple but meant everything. Charles made the final position clear through a documented public statement from the sovereign's office, the team responsible for communicating the monarch's official decisions. The king confirmed that Catherine's reduced schedule had his full support and that no ceremonial demand or constitutional custom would override medical judgment. He had chosen family stability over the appearance of endless royal strength. The miracle was not simply that Catherine survived. It was that survival changed them. The monarchy stopped treating vulnerability as weakness and began recognizing it as a source of empathy, discipline, and trust. For once, the crown did not demand sacrifice. It stepped back, allowed a family to heal, and discovered that the monarchy appeared strongest when Catherine was finally permitted to be human. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.